Seth Rollins, the self-proclaimed visionary, self-proclaimed face of WWE, has just shaken the foundation of WWE, and fans are still in shock from what went down on Monday Night Raw. Bron Breakker and Seth Rollins, both members of the visionary movement, have just clashed on Monday Night Raw, and fans could not believe why. Stay with me, let me tell you what really happened. The chaos that erupted on this week's Monday Night Raw was not the kind of chaos that gets cleaned up in 10 minutes with a commercial break and a handshake. Not the kind of chaos that WWE occasionally manufactures to fill time on a slow night and then neatly resolves itself before the show goes off the air. Not the kind of chaos that feels like a controlled burn. Real chaos. Unpredictable chaos. The kind that spills out of the television screen and grabs you by the collar and refuses to let go. The kind that has people across every wrestling forum, every comment section, every group chat, every office conversation absolutely losing their minds trying to figure out what they just watched and what on earth it means for where this whole thing is going. That is what Monday Night Raw on March 9th, 2026 delivered. And at the absolute center of it all, the eye of this particular storm, the man whose name is being said with a mixture of disbelief and genuine alarm across the entire wrestling world right now, is Bron Breakker. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because I know this audience. I know my longtime viewers who have been with this channel for years, and I know that some of you remember my previous discussions about Bron Breakker. The conversations about positioning, about physical presence, about whether the comparisons to Brock Lesnar and Goldberg truly hold up under scrutiny. And I want to address that directly and immediately right here at the top before we get into anything else. Everything I said in those previous videos stands. The analytical framework I gave you for understanding why certain superstars work in certain roles still holds. Nothing about what happened on March 9th invalidates those observations. But what happened on March 9th? What Bron Breakker did to Seth Rollins? The way he went after Paul Heyman? The absolute, unfiltered, barely containable energy he brought to every single second of that night? That demands a separate, serious, thorough conversation. Because whatever you thought you knew about Bron Breakker before March 9th, whatever your assessment of his ceiling, his character, his potential, this night may have added a dimension that changes the calculation. Not completely. Not in a way that contradicts everything, but in a way that matters. So pull up a chair. We are going deep today. We are going through every moment, every implication, every layer of what happened on Raw on March 9th, 2026. We are talking about Bron Breakker's brutal attack on Seth Rollins. We are talking about Bron Breakker going after Paul Heyman, and what that specific choice tells us about where this character is headed. We are talking about the fallout, the consequences, the WrestleMania implications, and the question everyone in the wrestling world is now asking. Is Bron Breakker finally becoming the superstar WWE always believed he could be? Let's find out together. Before we can fully appreciate the explosion that happened on March 9th, we need to understand the pressure that had been building inside this story. We need to understand where Bron Breakker was as a character. Psychologically, narratively, in terms of his position on the card, coming into this particular Monday Night Raw. And I want to be honest with you about this because honesty is what this channel is built on. I have been critical in the past about Bron Breakker's positioning in WWE. I have made the argument that comparing him to Brock Lesnar and Goldberg creates an expectation he struggles to meet visually, physically, in terms of the specific brand of overwhelming, inescapable physical menace that those legends carried with them everywhere they went. And I stand by that analysis. I still believe it. But here is something that my longtime viewers know I always try to do. I separate the critique of the positioning from the assessment of the talent. Those are two different conversations. You can believe that someone is being positioned incorrectly and simultaneously believe that they have genuine talent that, in the right context, with the right creative direction, with the right moment given to them at the right time, could absolutely connect with an audience. Bron Breakker has been in an interesting and, frankly, somewhat frustrating position on WWE Raw for a stretch of time now. He has been presented as a dominant force. Given wins, given push, given the kind of booking attention that signals WWE's genuine investment in him as a future star. But something has been slightly off about how it's all landed with the audience. Not catastrophically off. Not in a way that suggests the audience has rejected him. but in a way that suggests there is a gap between what WWE is selling and what the audience is fully buying. And that gap, that slight, persistent disconnect between intended perception and actual reception, is the kind of thing that builds pressure inside a character's story. Because in professional wrestling, when a push isn't generating the exact response that creative intended, the natural storytelling response is to escalate. To find a moment that forces the audience to reckon with this character in a new and more urgent way. To blow something up. March 9th, 2026 was that escalation. That forced reckoning. That explosion. And the targets WWE chose for that explosion. Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman were not random. They were the most strategically intelligent choices possible. And once I break down why, you're going to understand this story on a completely different level. Let's talk about Seth Rollins, because the relationship between Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker in the context of Monday Night Raw is one of the most layered dynamics currently running in WWE, and it doesn't always get the credit it deserves in the broader wrestling conversation. Seth Rollins has been, for an extended period, one of the top-tier superstars on Monday Night Raw. The visionary, the architect of his own destiny, or at least the character who most explicitly positions himself that way. Seth Rollins is someone who has held championships, headlined WrestleManias, engaged in legendary rivalries, and consistently produced some of the most entertaining and technically excellent professional wrestling television that Raw has offered in the past several years. He is, by virtually every measure, an established star at the highest level of this industry. And Bron Breakker, however much momentum he generates, however impressive he looks in the ring, however genuinely athletic and intense he is in any given segment, is not yet that. He is a rising star. He is someone with enormous potential that has been clearly invested in by WWE's creative direction. But he is not yet at Seth Rollins' level of established, proven, undeniable credibility in the eyes of the WWE universe. That gap between where Seth Rollins is and where Bron Breakker is trying to get to, that gap is, in professional wrestling terms, precisely the most dramatic and compelling space for a rivalry to exist. Because here's what you need to understand about how the best wrestling feuds work. The most powerful rivalries are not between two equally established legends who fight each other to a draw and everyone goes home satisfied. The most powerful rivalries are the ones where a rising force collides with an established order and forces a question. Is the rising force real enough, strong enough, compelling enough to actually displace the established order? Seth Rollins represents the established order on Monday Night Raw. Bron Breakker, by attacking him on March 9th with that particular level of ferocity, is making his loudest possible statement that he intends to answer that question with an emphatic yes. Now let me talk about the attack itself, because the specifics matter enormously and they tell us a lot about the Bron Breakker character in this specific moment. The attack on Seth Rollins on March 9th was not a backstage ambush. It was not a cheap shot from behind while Seth was distracted or looking the other way. It was not the kind of attack that a lesser character uses when they don't have the genuine goods to confront someone directly. It was a direct, in-your-face, stand-right-in-front-of-you confrontation that escalated into one of the most violent and impactful physical moments that Monday Night Raw has produced in recent memory. And the distinction matters. It matters enormously for understanding what WWE is trying to build with Bron Breakker right now. There are two kinds of heel attacks in professional wrestling. The first kind is the cheap, cowardly attack, the one that generates heat for the attacker through contempt. You boo this person because they took a shortcut, because they attacked from behind, because they couldn't face their target head-on and chose to operate in the shadows instead. This generates heel heat effectively, but it also communicates something specific about the character doing the attacking. They are afraid. On some level, however buried under their bluster, the cheap attack reveals a fear of direct confrontation. The second kind is the dominant, direct attack, the kind where a character looks their target in the eye, gives them every opportunity to see what's coming, and then dismantles them anyway. Because they are genuinely confident that even in a fair confrontation, even without the element of surprise, they are simply the more powerful force in the situation. This kind of attack generates a different heat. Not contempt, exactly, more like that complicated cocktail of fear and respect that the best monster heels in wrestling history have always generated. Bron Breakker's attack on Seth Rollins on March 9th was the second kind. He didn't sneak up on Seth. He went at him directly. With that specific Bron Breakker intensity that, I will give him full credit for, is one of the most genuinely authentic feeling qualities he brings to any segment he's in. The intensity isn't performed. It doesn't look like someone acting angry or aggressive for the cameras. It looks like someone who has genuinely, truly decided that this is the moment, this is the target, and nothing in between is going to slow him down. The spear. That explosive, ground-shaking spear that is Bron Breakker's most devastating offensive weapon, landed on Seth Rollins with the kind of force that makes you physically wince even watching it through a television screen. The impact was real. The violence of it was communicated completely and totally. And the aftermath, Seth Rollins' body after absorbing that impact, the way he was down, the way the arena reacted, communicated everything that the attack needed to communicate. Bron Breakker is dangerous. Genuinely, legitimately, right now dangerous. Not dangerous as a future projection, not dangerous in theory, not dangerous in the abstract, dangerous today in this moment on this show. That is the message the attack on Seth Rollins sent. And it sent it clearly. But then Bron Breakker made a choice that took this from a great heel attack to something significantly more complex and interesting. He went after Paul Heyman. Let me spend real time on this because I think the decision to have Bron Breakker go after Paul Heyman on March 9th is the single most important creative choice in this entire story, and it's the choice that tells us the most about where WWE is taking the Bron Breakker character. Paul Heyman is not a physical threat to Bron Breakker. Everyone watching understands this. The Wiseman is not going to physically respond to anything Bron Breakker does to him in a ring or ringside setting. He is not a competitor in that sense. He is a strategist, a mouthpiece, a manager, one of the greatest ever at all of those things, but none of them involve taking bumps and trading punches with a 280-pound athlete who runs like a freight train. So why go after Paul Heyman? The answer is layered, and every layer is fascinating. Layer 1. Paul Heyman is not just a manager. He is a symbol. He is one of the most recognizable symbols of power, influence, and backstage political acumen in the history of professional wrestling. Going after Paul Heyman is going after everything that Paul Heyman represents: the network of relationships, the strategic influence, the ability to shape narratives and control situations that a man with his experience and reputation commands. By targeting Paul Heyman, Bron Breakker is saying something much larger than, "I want to fight you." He is saying, "I am not intimidated by your influence. I am not going to navigate around your power. I am going directly through it." Layer 2. Paul Heyman's associations. You cannot talk about Paul Heyman without talking about the people whose stories he has been intertwined with. Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, the entire bloodline storyline that defined WWE for several years. And in the current moment, the current Raw landscape that we've been discussing across multiple videos on this channel. Paul Heyman's positioning relative to Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi and the broader power struggle on the show makes him a uniquely significant target. When Bron Breakker goes after Paul Heyman, he is not just attacking a manager. He is pulling on threads that connect to Brock Lesnar, that connect to the entire history of the Wiseman's influence on WWE's biggest stories. And by pulling on those threads, he is inserting himself into a larger narrative in the most forceful, most direct, most impossible-to-ignore way possible. Layer 3. The heat. Going after Paul Heyman generates a specific kind of heat that attacking Seth Rollins alone could not fully produce. Because Seth Rollins, as beloved and respected as he is a competitor. He is someone the audience understands might be attacked by a rising heel force. That's the expected nature of the show. But Paul Heyman? Paul Heyman standing ringside, Paul Heyman on the outside of the ring, Paul Heyman who is not there as a physical participant but as a strategic presence. Going after him crosses a line that the audience responds to at a deep, visceral level. It feels transgressive. It feels like a violation of an unwritten rule. And violations of unwritten rules are the most reliable generators of genuine heat in professional wrestling, because they tap into something instinctive and moral rather than just logical. And layer 4, and this is the one I find most compelling from a pure storytelling perspective, by going after Paul Heyman, Bron Breakker has guaranteed consequences. Not just from Seth Rollins, not just from WWE management trying to restore order, but from Paul Heyman himself. who, as I have said on this channel many times and will say again, is always thinking 3 moves ahead. Paul Heyman does not simply absorb an attack and move on. Paul Heyman processes, plans, and responds. And Paul Heyman's responses tend to be the most strategically devastating things that happen in any storyline he's involved with. By attacking Paul Heyman, Bron Breakker didn't just make a statement. He started a war. And wars involving Paul Heyman tend to be among the most compelling stories professional wrestling produces. The title of this video includes a specific and important phrase, "Take Paul Heyman Revenge." And I want to dig into the revenge element of this story specifically, because understanding the source of Bron Breakker's grievance against Paul Heyman is essential to understanding the full emotional architecture of what happened on March 9th. Because revenge in professional wrestling is one of the most powerful storytelling engines there is. But revenge only works, only truly resonates, when the audience understands and feels the legitimacy of the grievance. Revenge without a genuine wound is just aggression. And aggression, while entertaining, is a fundamentally less complex and less emotionally engaging story than true revenge. So what is Bron Breakker's grievance against Paul Heyman? This is where the story gets genuinely fascinating, and where the intelligence of the storytelling, when you trace it back through the months of Raw that have led to this point, becomes clear. Paul Heyman's influence on the WWE landscape has, at various points in the recent story, worked against Bron Breakker's interests. Not always directly, not always in ways that were obvious or explicit in the moment, but when you look at the series of events, the way certain storylines developed, the way certain opportunities were shaped or redirected, the specific moments where Bron Breakker's trajectory seemed to stall or shift in ways that didn't entirely serve him, the fingerprints of Heyman-style strategic manipulation are there. And Bron Breakker has seen them. He has processed them. He has connected the dots in the way that only someone with a genuine, personal investment in their own career trajectory can connect them. Here's what makes this revenge story particularly compelling in the context of the broader WWE narrative. Paul Heyman's influence has historically been deployed in service of certain specific visions of what WWE should look like and who should be at the top of it. His partnerships with Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns were not random or purely personal. They were expressions of a strategic vision about which kind of performer, which kind of character, which kind of dominance deserved to be at the center of the industry. And in that vision, there may not have been a prominent role for Bron Breakker. There may have been a calculation, conscious or otherwise, that Bron Breakker was a certain kind of performer who served a certain function, but was not the Brock Lesnar replacement, not the next great monster, not the figure around whom the most important stories would be built. Bron Breakker, by attacking Paul Heyman on March 9th, is rejecting that calculation. He is saying, your assessment of me is wrong. Your vision of this company's hierarchy is about to be revised. And I am going to revise it myself personally starting right now. That is a genuinely compelling motivation. That is not just, I'm angry, I'm going to hit people. That is a character with a specific wound, the wound of being undervalued, of being positioned beneath where his ambition demands he should be, expressing that wound through the most direct action available to him. That is great professional wrestling storytelling. Let me take you inside that arena on March 9th for a moment, because the crowd's reaction to what Bron Breakker did, the specific texture of the noise that building made during and after the attack on Seth Rollins and the confrontation with Paul Heyman, is itself a form of data that tells us a lot about where this character is landing with audiences. Because here's something that my longtime viewers know I always pay close attention to. Crowd reactions in professional wrestling are not just emotional responses. They are information. They tell you whether the story is landing, whether the character is connecting, whether the intended message is being received by the people who are most important to any wrestling product, the live audience, the people who have invested their time and money and emotional energy into being present for this. And the crowd reaction to Bron Breakker on March 9th was, and I want to be specific about this, complicated. Not bad. Complicated. And in professional wrestling, complicated is almost always better than simple.